Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to get started. Good afternoon, and thank you for coming. Welcome to the webinar. We're here to talk about maximizing efficiency and security with Copilot. I'm Thea Rasmussen, Director of CX Strategy with BroadReach, and I'm going to be your host for today's session. And it's a pleasure to have you all here as we're going to dive into some practical aspects of planning, implementing, and adopting Copilot securely throughout your organization. Before we get started, I did want to take the opportunity to introduce BroadReach for those of you that may not be familiar with our group. So BroadReach is a technology advisor and consultant with access to over 600 different suppliers across a variety of different technology pillars, including security, network connectivity, CX, AI and automation, and contact center, just to name a few. In addition to that, we have a killer back office team who provides both program and project management services that can overlay complex multi-vendor projects. All that said, we actually don't directly sell anything. Instead, we sit on the customer side of the table and advise our clients on which technologies to procure and educate them as to why. So whether your initiatives are surrounding risk management, digital transformation, AI strategy, or cost reduction and vendor consolidation, we can assist. Our team has an average of over 2 decades of experience, and we are ready and raring to go. The last thing I'm going to leave you with is where the name BroadReach came from, because it does a really good job of explaining the benefit of what we do. For you sailors out there, BroadReach is actually a sailing term, and it describes the combination of a sail position and wind direction that allows you to propel forward at a faster clip with minimal effort. And that's exactly what we do for our clients. So with that, let's get back to our scheduled programming. We're going to cover today everything from initial strategy formulation to the evolution of AI beyond Copilot, and of course, everything in between. And we only have an hour to do it, so let's get started. We have a fantastic trio of experts to guide us through this discussion today. So from Impact Group, we have Bruce Jacobson. He is the Microsoft 365 and Azure practice lead, and he's going to share some insights on successful adoption strategies and implementation best practices. From Varonis, we have Andrew Black, Manager of Sales Engineering, and he's going to shed some light on the security concerns that are really important to consider and also some solutions available to mitigate those. And finally, we have the President of Compose Labs, Eric Carr. He's going to discuss not only initial strategy, but also what comes after Copilot and some evolutions and customized applications he's been involved with that take the use of AI to the next level. Throughout the session, we're going to provide you with some actionable insights and real-world examples to help you leverage Copilot effectively without compromising your organization's security or compliance requirements. We're also going to be opening it up for a Q&A segment towards the end of the hour. So please feel free to send your questions throughout the session, either via chat or the Q&A option there. We'd love to hear from you. All right, let's get to know some of these brilliant folks, okay? Eric, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about Compose Labs and what it is you do for them.
Thank you very much, Thea, for the time, and appreciate everyone attending this. As Thea mentioned, I'm Eric Carr, President of Compose Labs. We are a software development shop based in the Twin Cities. Our headquarters in downtown Minneapolis. We're really focused on 3 key areas. Number 1 is application development and cloud engineering. So we work with a number of our clients to build applications as well as work with them existing applications. And then also as that kind of fits within their broader cloud infrastructure and DevOps infrastructure ops pipelines. The second area that we're pretty focused on is data integration. So as with a lot of things, a lot of our solutions as well as our clients are driven by their data, not only kind of data platforms around where the data is stored and the reporting and analytics off of that, but also the data fabric, the data flow within organizations. So we work with our clients to both understand their needs, build strategies around their data, as well as implement either integration or data platforms. And the third area, mainly relevant for this conversation, is really around generative AI. So we've worked with a number of clients over the last year and a half, especially in the generative AI space. As I mentioned, we've done a lot of data and analytics things historically, but been really working with our clients to kind of help them both navigate as well as identify the key technologies and helping them and implementing them and having, driving business value in their organizations.
Excellent. Fantastic. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate that. Andrew, let's have you introduce yourself and let us know a little bit more about Varonis and how you're playing in the space.
Yeah, appreciate it. So I work for Varonis here. So Varonis is a data security company, and it offers a data security platform. Been around for about 20 years, and the focus is really around protecting and securing data holistically. So not just a point solution, but to really solve concerns around how businesses use data, what data is critical, how to protect that, how to do ongoing monitoring. So we play across a very wide space of both on-premise data sets, cloud data sets, whether it's databases or SaaS applications. We really focus our efforts around where data is stored. And then we build out really three outcomes for organizations. And one is real-time visibility, which is understanding what's sensitive, how it's being used, how people can access it. We provide automations so that companies can keep up with modern solutions like cloud and AI products that are generating data really, really fast. So we build automation to scale up and meet those productivity needs from a security standpoint. And then lastly, we provide alerting and incident response. So we have a user behavior analysis and an incident response team that has eyes on glass 24/7 to ensure when something malicious, suspicious, or that needs to be addressed from a data perspective, you have that coverage there. So really appreciate the invite in the panel. I have a personal stake in a lot of AI development. We've put AI into our tool from a user perspective, as well as helping secure it. So really appreciate the time and looking forward to the discussion here.
Awesome. We appreciate you being here. I think your insights are going to be extremely valuable. And finally, Bruce, let's hear about yourself and Impact Group.
Yeah, so my name is Bruce Jacobson. I'm with Impact Group. Impact Group's been around for more than 30 years as a full-service IT consulting group, providing consulting services around a variety of system integrations and projects. We do overall program and project management services, provide strategic services, and also CIO as a service. We also have another side of our group that does managed services and service desk work. And it, as Thea mentioned at the beginning, I'm involved with the Microsoft 365 and Azure stack, and so do work around that. My personal history goes back to one of the very first SharePoint installs, and I got roped into that and I've never left. So that was actually version 1 beta of SharePoint in the year 2000. So
nice.
So it's been a lot of fun to see all the advancements on the Microsoft side, and now to participate in Copilot and the whole AI kind of revolution that's going on. So as the others mentioned, thank you very much for inviting me today, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
As am I. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it. All right, let's start our discussion today around the strategy and planning parts of this. So Eric, I'm going to start with you. What are some of the best practices around generating an overall AI strategy? And what would you say are some of the common missteps customers make?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think I'd start with, I mean, this is still a nascent market. I think ChatGPT 3.5 was released in November 2022. Might sound like years ago for many folks, but that really was where, the market, this new generative AI kick really happened. And I think that motivated a lot of interest in that. I think across your marketing and sales organizations, people, I'm guessing most people on this call have tried out ChatGPT or one of the other ones out there. I think that's really been a great start. And that motivated a lot of conversations during 2023 at the board level with the CXO suite around what do we do with generative AI. And I think a lot of those conversations were probably a little bit more, moonshots, or ones that are a little bit more out there. And I think what we've seen, especially over the last 6 to 9 months, is a lot more focus on kind of really how you can leverage generative AI for operational improvements, or how do I improve my business? And I think we've seen, we both have worked with a number of clients, as well as we've seen clients kind of create these lists of generative AI use cases, done some amount of prioritization, and then really identifying a handful to kind of drive forward in terms of either proof of concepts or proof of value. So I think that's been really, a very very good way that a lot of companies have started, and I think we continue to encourage our companies to do that. With that said, I think a lot of companies, kind of maybe getting to the second part of the question, have really struggled with where to start. So after you get a list of a few hundred use cases, I think a lot of generative AI is experiential. It's still a very new space, and I think we very much have encouraged our clients to try out, ChatGPT, try out Copilot, really see what those technologies can potentially do, and the classes of use cases that each one of them is tailored for within their organization. With that said, we've had a lot of clients kind of either leverage the generative AI integration into existing products. There is a lot of really interesting standalone AI products, as well as we've obviously have worked with a lot of clients more on the custom side. So similar to the cloud and other development stacks, you have stuff out of the box, and you also have a mix of kind of customization. So all to say, I think net is, I think we really would continue to recommend starting with use cases, ideally focused on specific parts of the business, and then secondarily really starting to try some. A lot of the privacy security considerations can be figured out along the way. The technology stacks are going to continue to evolve regardless. So try to think about not locking in, but really getting some experience around how ChatGPT or GPT is different than what Google's offering which is different than as Azure's offering. And I think really that experience and getting comfortable with what generative AI can do is really critical to kind of get going. So
That's fantastic. Appreciate that. Bruce, what do you think are some of the critical steps in the planning and execution of a smooth Copilot rollout specifically?
Yeah, and kind of picking up on what Eric was saying, I think that I think organizations really need to be very purposeful about this. There is a lot going on out there right now, and I think organizations really want to kind of take the leadership position on that with their users. And so I think it's important to come up with, what are some of the strategies that we're going to start with, and what are some of those success criteria that we have around those, and kind of who's going to lead this. And I think one of the things we try to encourage organizations to do early on is to set up kind of an AI council, right? A set of users that can kind of help to guide that, really provide some clarity and purpose and priorities around what these initial efforts are going to be. So I think that whole leadership thing is really important. And then I think there's both the user side and the technology side, right? So, on the user side, just to be able to kind of anticipate what you want out of this initial kind of wave and what some of those employee experiences should be, kind of think about the culture and how you can change that, and kind of be very intentional with some of the people that you're inviting in early, both in terms of department and in terms of role. We were just meeting with an organization just last week, and they are one of 5 divisions of a company, and they were talking about how they should strategize this whole thing, right? And it's like some divisions have situations that are more applicable than others, right? But should everybody be involved early on, or should we just have 3 of the 5 divisions? Or, asking all of those kinds of questions and really kind of deciding who should be partaking in all of this and some of the early things. And then on the technical side, just making sure that everything is kind of in order from an overall best practice perspective. You want this to get rolled out with some governance in place, obviously security, obviously compliance things. So it's like making sure that all of that's thought through before you head down the road too far. And I think this is kind of like rings of users. Early on, an organization can play around with some things, a really small selective group, kind of a proof of concept kind of thing. And then you start to get kind of a pilot group going. And then you kind of push that out to some leaders, kind of champions, and then kind of out to your main initial group, some of those early adopters, right? And just to be kind of purposeful about that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. So, Andrew, what do we need to worry about here? What are some of the primary security risks with implementing Copilot, and how are organizations that you work with mitigating those?
Yeah, so I think there's really two things organizations are concerned about when it comes with AI, and one is what data it's collecting and what data it's serving up. So Bruce, I think mentioned right when it comes to whether it's data governance, it might be data security. Organizations don't want their intellectual property being shown to the wrong people. They don't want it being collected by outside systems. Governance, privacy. There's a lot of different security concerns that what I find keeps organizations stuck in that pilot phase where they have a group of users using it, but they want to expand in these concerns around, hey, what data is it going to serve up? What's going to occur with it really holds them back. And what we see is it comes down to a couple primary areas. The biggest, and this is not a new problem, people have access to way too much data. Microsoft released a report across 365 that 99% of the permissions go unused. So that's a massive amount of access across the globe right now that the business doesn't need in order to operate and function, that is creating risk. When we look at AI, that problem's existed. We've seen a lot of data breaches, but when you put AI into play, it becomes a much bigger security concern because instead of having to enumerate and sift through folders and shares and databases, you now have a tool that you can just ask, hey, do I have access to any security keys, any API keys, passwords? And that really opens up the possibility that data gets either quickly exposed to a malicious actor or accidentally exposed in a way that someone didn't realize they had access to. Give a couple examples later on that. But those are really the main concerns is how do you lock down the access to the organization? What data do they need access to? What data should never be served up is often a concern. So organizations, as they're going through these pilots, are finding out, they have secret projects, Project Alpha, that they don't ever want an AI to serve up information. It's highly confidential. It could get them in a lot of trouble if anyone gets certain details. So identifying what data shouldn't be used in AI, Eric brought up some great uses of building models, implementing into technology. So making sure that certain data sets aren't getting built into those models, right? If you're in healthcare and you're building something for patients, you definitely don't want it to serve up some other patient's information because the model is pulling from a bad data source.
That's a really good point. I have more questions around that, but we have some other good questions later on. I'm not going to try to steal my own thunder here. So we've gotten planning done. We have a strategy in place. We know where we want to start and where we're looking to head. So how do we get people to use it effectively? So Bruce, what are some of the strategies that you found most effective for getting people to actually use Copilot?
Yeah, and I think one at the very top has got to be kind of just overall education for some of these users. I just was reading a study that was published on Monday, and it said that AI, for folks that went through AI training, they were 19 times more likely to find value and 7 times more likely to have trusted results. That's kind of demonstrates a lot right there, right? As far as overall rollout. And I think it's important. A lot of people, it's amazing how many people don't really know what AI is, right? Even if they think they do.
Yeah,
and I think even
so
more people don't really understand it in the context of themselves sitting at their desk at work, right? And so I think it's important to kind of just get them kind of oriented as far as, well, hey, what is this Copilot thing? And what would I use it? Where do I use it? Right? Hey, it's inside of all my Microsoft products. It's like, oh, cool. So, kind of what are some of the use cases that I would use it for then? And just having them kind of really understand what it is that they're being asked to do and how you want them to participate, and kind of really trying to drive that vision through some training. I think another thing too that's kind of goes along with that is, if I mentioned earlier, I think it's a good idea to set kind of these rings and to get some champions involved early on, and then to kind of broaden that out to the next ring of kind of early adopters. And then from there, I think just trying to figure out where you want that to go. But I think since you've got a fairly contained group early on. I think one of the things that you can really do is set up kind of a user community amongst those people, right? You can make the champions be part of that. That really lets the organization communicate out to those users, but also to get feedback back from them again, to kind of see how things are going. And to kind of celebrate some of the successes, kind of find out where some of the obstacles are, to let them do cross learning amongst themselves, right? To kind of share their knowledge and their experiences. So I think, I think there's a lot of things like that that can really help to support that overall initiative. And I think that one of the things that in a project like this, in a rollout like this, that you really kind of have going for you is once people use this technology, they're like, wow, that's pretty cool, right? And they'll likely have a positive feedback from it, a positive experience from it. And I think that that really is important to kind of understand that as an organization too. I think if it's done well, that also reflects well on the organization, right? People that feel like they're getting more stuff done at work and that it's taking less time to do kind of some of those mundane kinds of tasks, they also have a better attitude about their work, right? And about the organization that they're working for. So I think there's some of those things that come into play as well. And I think it's important to think about those things.
Absolutely. That's a great response. I recently heard that Microsoft was doing some research around, user adoption and really buy-in. And they had some stats that said folks need to use it 11 times and gain 11 minutes of efficiency each time they use it to really get that buy-in, which is quite a bit more than I would anticipate, honestly. But they've been, and I'm sure they're going to continue to run some numbers too. It was an interesting stat. Andrew, how does Varonis ensure that data privacy is maintained while using Copilot? I know that, you can take an initial scope of what's out there in the environment, but it's so organic and it continues to grow. So how does the ongoing maintenance work there?
Yeah, so I mean, this is what I really enjoy working about Varonis is actually being able to solution something that gets organizations out of that pilot phase. But to be honest, I mean, this is really something that just needs to be addressed at the data component. When you solve the challenge of knowing where data, where your sensitive data is, where your regulated data is, and you can put in effective access controls, and you have a reporting system that can show you who can access this data, how they're accessing it, what type of prompts they're using, which, the way that you engineer a prompt can widely dictate the type of data and like the graph permissions, for instance, Copilot will use. But it really starts with being able to identify that data and lock it down, both from a Copilot perspective, which you want to create direct integrations, how your organization's using it, but also, for parts of the organization that might be using ChatGPT or building their own internal model using OpenAI, they have access to that data. They can pull it. So we've come across situations in organizations where someone has been using ChatGPT and they found that some of their intellectual property was actually coming back from results.
Oh man.
So there's that concern of somebody took information, they put it into a system, and now that system's starting to learn about that. So it's really critical that it's protected not just at the AI layer of what can Copilot access, but at the user layer as well. And then, as I mentioned, from an ongoing standpoint, monitoring how people interact with prompts, what they're using it for, what kind of sensitive data is it pulling, is really critical to the ongoing usage. Because even when you lock things down just to the right users that are supposed to have that access, they might misuse it for malicious reasons. Their account could be compromised. So it's really critical you both understand what type of data sets the users are interacting with and how specifically how AI is interacting with it on top of that.
Absolutely. So now there's Copilot for Sales too, that has hooks into CRM data in addition to just everything that's in the Microsoft suite. I mean, that you gotta have some great examples of protection around that or potential breaches around that. Have you seen any kind of real world examples that you've come across?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so for what you brought up, I mean, there are graph hooks into things like Salesforce and Jira and different solutions. So some real world examples that we've seen, and very similar to when an account gets compromised in the past, an attacker will do a lot of enumeration. What devices can they access? What data sets? And they'll scan through it. It can take some time. And in a lot of cases, security teams can identify the compromise, get them out of the environment prior to them extracting sensitive information. Whereas if they get access to an account with Copilot, seen as they're leveraging prompts to get it to sort out API keys, passwords to systems, they can move to other accounts and start accessing data really, really quickly. So that's really what we've seen as the challenge for organizations, is how quick data can be exfiltrated. Seen a lot of examples of what I would call accidental overexposure of data. So users prompting something on collecting information about employees, and suddenly their salary information gets dumped into it. There's been some HR incidents right over how that data is being leveraged. So those are probably the most common things we're coming across, where organizations have turned it on and they've seen data go into the wrong hands, how quickly it happens. Say the other part is, I see a lot of where organizations are testing the waters. So I met with a security director a couple weeks ago, a very large construction company, and the business said, "Hey, we think we're good to go with Copilot. We've done a bunch of testing." Their pilot group essentially did things like show me the CEO's salary. And of course, Copilot's smart enough to say, hey, I probably shouldn't serve you up the CEO's salary, even if they have access to it. So there's some guardrails that Microsoft has built. But the security director is a little more savvy with AI, said, hey, I need you to build me a table in comparison of compensation, bonus, and salary across my department and the executive team. And it immediately served up that information.
Oh, wow.
So
that's cool.
I mean,
scary, but cool.
Yeah. So a lot of it really comes down to, Bruce mentioned the AI training, really important for the business to be productive. But it's also really important to understand that people that are trying to abuse these products have that type of training, and they know how to leverage and engineer these prompts to be abusive and very effective when it comes to doing things organizations don't want them to, or really can't due to regulatory needs.
Right. How do you enable your people while still having them be the biggest security risk to your organization? I mean, that's tale's old as time, I suppose. But okay, so now that we've scared you appropriately, Bruce, let's talk about cost justification. I mean, we're talking about new technology. This is the biggest thing that gets us over the threshold. So how have you seen Copilot cost justify itself?
Yeah, so if you look at this, if you look at the average, employee wage, it doesn't take that much additional productivity to pay for Copilot on an individual basis. With that said, I think organizations certainly want to be prudent about the rollout of this, right? You can buy licenses for everybody and nobody's using it. And that is giving you then no return on investment. But, less than an hour of productivity, enhanced productivity time every month will pay for this license. So, that's the upside to it. I think this is, Eric, you mentioned this early on, this is kind of the Wild West out there, right? For all of these technologies, these AI technologies. And the studies are also kind of the Wild West in a bit. But most of the studies are showing that users can get maybe 10 hours additional productivity per month, right? So that's a pretty good return on investment, assuming you're being prudent about that. And I think of all the users that go through a fairly good process of rollout, you could expect that 70 to 80% of those are going to really see some significant additional productivity. So then I think it kind of comes back to, well, where should I look for some of those productivity wins, right? And on a personal user perspective, I think some of that is just the things that we do day to day, right? one of the biggest wins for Copilot is probably meetings. Just summarizing meeting content, and maybe I miss a meeting. It's like, well, what happened right during the meeting? And getting that a good summary of that information so that I know how I need to kind of catch up with the rest of the team. I think some of those things, such as, I mean, administrative things like emails, kind of being able to do some of those kinds of things. Just the other day, my wife works for a small company and is a director of a nonprofit, and so I get nominated to be her support group sometimes.
Of course.
And she said, "Hey, honey, I've got these 3 outlines that people gave me, and I need to turn this into a PowerPoint slide deck." Right now, she could have done that herself, right? But she could very efficiently do that just using Copilot. So, it's like some of those kinds of wins are the things that I think really help users do some very practical things, from a user perspective. And at the same time, really contribute to overall productivity for those users. And I touched on a little bit earlier about the fact that I think there's a lot to be said for just job satisfaction, right? If you could take some of those things that are just like almost painful and really reduce the effort that you have involved in that, well, that's a big win, right? Sitting at my seat. And so I think that really reflects well on what the organization's trying to accomplish and what that user wants to get accomplished. I think it's important to get some kind of feedback when it comes to overall cost justification. And I think that needs to be baked into an overall strategy there, especially early on when you do initial deployments of Copilot. I think having original goals that you come up with and then being able to measure against those is important, and trying to figure out how will we measure these things and how will we gain that information. Some of that can be directly from users and being purposeful about that. Microsoft also has the Microsoft Copilot dashboard that's part of Viva Insights that's accessible. And you can look there and see users that are using this, how they're using it, what kind of things that they're using it for, what kind of productivity gains they're getting from it, and really gives you a lot of kinds of insights there to be able to help cost justify this. And I think overall, that's really important from an early stage perspective. I'm back to my rings again. If we start with a very small group and say, what the heck is this? Okay, let's get some better feedback from some people. Let's have some champions involved. Let's get a group of users now. And you keep moving further and further out. Well, how far out should you go with that, right? Well, the distance you should go with that depends on what are you getting for it, right?
Right.
I'm paying this money and I keep adding users, and am I continuing to make that cost justifiable? So I think it is important to strategize that whole thing and have that feedback loop in place.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the Viva is what you called it, to provide the insights of who's using it. And do they actually provide information about productivity gains in that dashboard?
Microsoft's got a suite of tools out there called Viva, kind of very loosely bundled together under that topic. The Viva components all do kind of lots of different things. And the Insight part of that is one of the Viva tools, and it is part of Microsoft 365. And there is a whole bunch of information there that you can go and look at. You can see which users are using it, how much they're using it, what kinds of reductions that they've been getting. It'll kind of put some percentages around some of those things, and even show you that in relation to like some national data. So it at least gives you
how are you stacking up?
Yeah, for sure. How are you dealing with it? So.
And I know that there's now Teams Premium too. And are you seeing folks adopting Teams Premium to kind of have this more restricted rollout of Copilot? Because that, from my understanding, includes just the meeting capabilities. It just ties into the meetings where it does your summarization, your action items, your note taking for you. Are you seeing that as a kind of phase one deployment for a lot of folks?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that Teams Premium is getting a lot more attention because of Copilot, right?
Yeah.
Because I think is what happens is people are like, well, so what's this? What can I do with Copilot instead of Teams, right? And then all of a sudden it's like, well, hang on, what's this Teams Premium thing then? Is that giving me some of those things too? And there's actually very little overlap there between those two. They're kind of extensions of each other.
Hmm.
But I think it does bring up that conversation, and I think Copilot has a tendency to do that. Andrew was talking about that from a security standpoint. We've got a lot of clients that have not used data loss prevention technologies, and all of a sudden you start talking about security in the context of Copilot, and people are like, well, hang on, maybe I should be doing this, right? And
Hmm.
so I think overall those things are healthy, right? Microsoft probably thinks of that totally different than I do, but they think of it from a strategic opportunity, right? But I think there is definite benefit there. It's like Teams Premium. It's like, well, who should be using that? What does that give us, right?
Yeah.
Should we be using it? And what's the things that Copilot's giving us, and should we be using those things? And ditto on the security side, some of those extra tools there.
Awesome. Um, Before we get into Q&A, Eric, I want to go back to you. Now, Compose Labs plays more in the custom app development space. I'm curious how you've seen Copilot evolve in organizations' overall understanding of what's possible with AI and ultimately lead to maybe more customized projects that you would get involved in.
Yeah, and we maybe should have started a lot of this conversation around like defining Copilot. I think part of the challenge is I think
Oh, I suppose we didn't
Microsoft,
do that. Nice point.
well,
Do you want to
Microsoft,
define Copilot for us?
well, probably not, but I think part of the challenge is like Microsoft, I think they have over 20-ish, they have over 20 Copilots out there. And I think part of that is I
Oh,
think been really great in terms of how they're embedding generative AI into all their products. Under somewhat of an umbrella name. But I think it's also been, so I think part of it is driven by either like specific products, there's specific functionaries, you mentioned sales, service. So there's different layers. And I think what we have found is it is a great way for customers to kind of get familiar with some of the capabilities there. But either because of pricing reasons, if they want to roll it out to hundreds or thousands of their internal employees, there's obviously cost implications. There's also externally. That's something that we haven't really necessarily talked about, but a lot of our clients are looking at how do I leverage some of these generative AI technologies, not only for the productivity and kind of the benefits, the soft benefits of my employees, but also how do I provide better experiences for my customers. So we've seen people or clients kind of think about like, how do I go build custom applications? And you can leverage a lot of the same Azure infrastructure that they use for a lot of their cloud services, but how do you go plug in Azure OpenAI? How do you leverage some of the data platforms? How do you leverage that to really build out kind of custom solutions? So that's really what I think Copilot has been great from providing broader awareness around some of the types of use cases generative AI can do, but it also it's created confusion. Like
yeah.
there is a lot of variations. There's a lot of different overlap with a lot of these products that can get confusing. So again, like we work with other clients to understand, in many cases, Copilot, one of the variants of Copilot is the right option for them. In other cases, building something that's small point, kind of really more focused to address either their internal employees or their customers is kind of more compelling. And we work with our clients to understand, the technology, the data, the other considerations. I think we've talked about some of the data stuff. Part of it is, I think email is one of those ones where I think there's a lot of things shared on email, and if one of the co-pilots is ending up kind of using that as a corpus for analyzing that, that's a big deal. And I think also the other element is, which we've kind of gotten into, is like how do you go test and evaluate these solutions? I think everyone's probably heard the examples of either lawyers trying to use these things for cases. We've also heard the scenarios where customers have used it to kind of interact with customer support or customer success chatbots. and basically, get discounts or, other things. So there's a lot of, I think like edges that still need to get kind of smoothed out as we're doing that. And I think it's great that Microsoft has been really trying to drive that across their product portfolio. I think it's very much servicing like kind of a lowest common denominator for a lot of those use cases. But then, I think a number of companies are looking at how do I go create some more point solutions, which might be a combination of both Copilot and maybe some, custom development. So
I'm sensing a round 2 of this webinar defining all of the different Copilot options for Microsoft. We can do that in 30 minutes maybe next time, but that's great. That's a good point. Can you give us kind of a sneak peek of some of these next level customizations you've been doing for your clients outside of just Copilot? What are some of these iterations expanding into?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people started with like the Chat GPT. So how do I leverage a chatbot? And I think Andrew mentioned like a lot of prompt tuning. How do I go build like a prompt for like marketing, sales, summarization of notes? So I think that was that kind of wave one. Wave two, I think a lot of companies have been looking at how do I leverage these large language models to summarize and analyze my enterprise data. So retrieval augmentation is really kind of a very common way of leveraging some of these technology stacks to basically expose that. And that's across a lot of customer care, customer success. You have a lot of facts, product documentation, troubleshooting. It really provides another vehicle for both your internal agents to be able to support your users, but also in some cases providing self-serve capabilities. I think what we've been really focused on is more of the agentic approaches. So a lot of folks are beginning to look at how do I leverage generative AI to basically automate some of the manual processes that exist in my business. So some of that could be, RPA, robotic process automation centric. Some of it could be BPO. I think what's been really interesting with a lot of this generative AI technology is it's a lot more flexible than maybe some of the historical stacks. So a lot of your traditional RPA, if a website changes or some workflow changes, it's very brittle. And I think what's been interesting is we've been really focused on how do we start kind of from a supply chain for some of those internal processes across healthcare, legal, financial services, some of these industries that deal with a lot of unstructured data, deal with a lot of natural language. These large language models are game changer in terms of automating some of those processes that existed. So,
yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you for that. That's really good insight. We do have a couple of questions, so let's go there. I love actual live questions. So the first one in our Q&A is there value in a broader implementation of Purview information protection prior to rolling out Copilot? I'm going to let anyone take that.
I can certainly speak to it. Say it's the most common conversation we get into when it comes to implementation. So, there's a lot of really good controls from a Purview standpoint of actually applying labels of this data shouldn't be served up for Copilot. You can apply rights management. Bruce defined DLP. Let's say prior to Copilot, and this is where Varonis actually has a public partnership with Microsoft, is we really work on the front half to get organizations ready for rolling out Copilot from an access and data discovery standpoint. So that's really what we recommend as a first is an initial discovery. If you don't know where your data you need to protect is and you're not confident it's accurate, you're going to have a really hard time applying DLP to data that you don't know where it exists, how the business is using it. And then the second portion is to lock down that access. So work with industries of all different sizes, work with a manufacturing one earlier today, where we're really just building policies of, these users can't share this kind of data with these users. We want to make sure that people are part of the right security groups, and they're tightening up those controls before rolling out Copilot. I've seen both instances where organizations have just rolled it out, even when they have particular DLP controls. And what happens is data gets exposed. They ask why. Oh, that user had access to that and we didn't know about it. So that really the data discovery and locking down access are the two key areas that organizations are looking at from a privacy, especially when it's protecting customer information, their security information. And then, as I'd say, an ongoing effort of using Copilot. That's where both behavioral monitoring and a lot of the purview controls really come into play. Is, all right, people have the right access. Let's make sure that they're not abusing that, or an attacker, somebody coming from the outside, is intentionally abusing it.
That's a good point. And the other question is very much around this as well. I'm going to read it. Oh, yeah, please do.
Well, no, I could just add, like, also, I mean, I think we're big proponents. There's either public or private models, and I think we've talked a lot about the private models, public. I think really where people get in trouble is when you start trying to commingle it. And I think really we are very big proponents. If you are going to provide a public model, there should be no private information, even in the back end. So ideally, anonymize. Like remove any of that PII or any other sensitive data. But again, I think that commingling is like people try to build those models that are trying to leverage private data for public purposes. And that's really where I think there's been a number of examples with ChatGPT and other models where people are able to, prompt and actually pull out the raw information that was leveraged, and just, just keep things very, very clean would be a strong recommendation as you're thinking about the exposure of these models and the data that's underpinning them.
That's a fantastic point. Thank you.
Yeah. Can I throw a comment in here too?
Please do, Bruce. Yeah, please do.
I think it's from an organization new to a lot of these technologies. I think one of the things that's important to kind of think about, Copilot's one thing to kind of just roll that out, right? And for me to use that as an individual user sitting at my desk, I give the example of my wife, right, wanting to turn a bunch of Word docs into a PowerPoint slide deck. But the thing is I get going with that, right? And then I want to do more and more and more, right? And that evolves from having Copilot inside of Word and Copilot inside of PowerPoint and et cetera, into my team and the things that we're trying to do, and then our customers, right? And I think unless the organization is kind of pre-thought through some of those things, they really have to think about that up front and kind of dot the I's and cross the T's early on, because the users, once they get started, they just want to keep going, right? And Eric, you just touched on that. You just keep going, right? And pretty soon you're exposing all this stuff and kind of unintentionally. So there is definitely, with great power comes great responsibility, right? Spider-Man's on.
Right.
So
absolutely. So the other question, again, I think is really tied to this as well. I'm going to read it out and see if there's any additional comments that you folks have. So if a company is looking to roll out Copilot to key users, what are some initial security practices that can be used to mitigate risk? Are there data management tools, or does it come down to just end user training?
I think add to the end user training portion, I think, is a good call out. And it's something that I get asked very frequently is, hey, if we just train our users. From a security perspective, I think, to be fully transparent, there's no way you can solve that problem with user training. And it really comes down to, if you have a user that's doing something they're not supposed to, you can train them all that you want. But if they have malicious intention, that overcomes any type of training. And then the same if their credentials get compromised, right? Training the user. So there's obviously importance, right? Security practices, you can reduce the likelihood. But really the best way to mitigate risk is to reduce the likelihood that a user can actually impact something. So, something that we talk about a lot from a Varonis perspective when we're looking at data sets with companies is, what is this user's blast radius, right? So if Bruce has Copilot and I just logged into his account, what's all the data I can go access?
Right.
So it's really critical to really start from that. They said user training. Bruce bring up really good points of how to make it productive. I have to train my engineers how to use AI for our job role, and they're more effective. So it's a key part to get the productivity. But when it comes to security, you have to fight automation with automation. End users can now just click a button on a sensitive document that says, share this with my entire organization. And that access is out there immediately. So if you don't have something that can automatically detect that, revoke it, manage that access. We do hundreds of different risk assessments here at Varonis every year, and we see it essentially every time. There's always, oh, hey, we didn't know this was going on. Why did this user put that here? Most of the time it's not malicious, which really goes into that component of organizations trying to do their job, trying to be effective. They're leveraging productivity tools, automated access controls, AI. And from a security standpoint, it's how do you provide the same sort of functionality of automating the reduction of risk to really play hand in hand with the productivity side.
That's a great point. Any other additions to that? We covered it. Yeah. All right, so those are all our questions. I'm gonna remind you all that you can put them in the Q&A section if you have burning questions. No bad questions. Otherwise, I'm gonna let each of you kind of have a few words out. And if we're done a couple minutes early, I think that's fair. Eric, any last nuggets of information you think that is really pertinent to this topic that people should know?
No, I just reiterate, I mean, just trying out these tools. I think personally, trying out ChatGPT or Copilot, like really taking advantage of what these tools can do. It's very experiential. Also, I think secondarily, it's a lot more powerful than you think. So some of it is really just trying things out, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work. And I think really that's part of the journey. I think a lot of it, we always think in terms of like the early days of cloud, the early days of mobile, a lot of these other tech journeys, like we're just very much in those early days. And, I think I've always continued to be pleasantly surprised at what these models can do, both, to help with a quick birthday rhyme for my young daughter, or, for work purposes. Like it's pretty amazing. Sure. And, I mean, obviously there's the risks, but to me, I'm somewhat of an optimist, and I feel like really how do these tools not necessarily replace people, but how do they? And kind of Bruce talked to this. How do I gain time back so I can focus on the higher value things that I as people can do versus some of these manual exercises. So that's really what how do we get more efficiencies, but also some of it's like how do we go get more efficiencies so we can do more of the things that we enjoy doing versus just trying to crank out more for the sake of cranking out stuff. So.
Right. And there's going to be an innate separation of those using it versus those who don't. I mean, from a human capital perspective, if you're getting these efficiency gains and this company just says, oh, no, too risky, I mean, there's going to be a separation there. So that's a great point. Thank you, Eric. Bruce, how about you? How about any final thoughts from your side?
Yeah, and I'll just pick up on what Eric said. I think these tools are pretty awesome. And I think the other thing that we see is users start to use them and they think they're pretty awesome too, right? I think there is some kind of shine and sparkle to the use of these things. There's some real practicality as far as the fact that it does kind of make some of those things that are pretty mundane and not as much fun go a lot faster. And people appreciate that. There's always this innate sense, I think, amongst people that they want to be productive and they want to feel good about the things that they're doing, and I think these products really tie into that. And I think as organizations go through the process and due diligence on them, I think these things do have an impact, and they'll continue to see that for some time in the future. So,
absolutely. Thank you. Andrew, how about you? Any closing thoughts, remarks?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with Eric and Bruce from the productivity side. I mean, what I always really bring up when it comes to AI is that the future is going to propel forward one way or another. People are going to get trained and more efficient. And so, organizations that are trying to push this off, I think, are at a lot of risk because those productivity gains are going to become inevitable. I think we're at a state of, can you be on the bleeding edge and take advantage of them now? But at some point, this is going to be a part of daily life and usage. So, from a security standpoint, that's where I really enjoy helping enable companies to use this because I like seeing the output of it. Just to reiterate what I've talked about before, it's really understanding the impact from a security standpoint. So, I think a small plug for Varonis here, we do complimentary Copilot readiness assessments. So doing something like that provides you, here is that blast radius for any user in our environment, and just understanding where your sensitive data is, what that risk is where we always recommend organizations to start. As a company, we look to provide solutions to help fix those problems, but it really starts with what is our organization's problem? What data do we need to protect? and how much is it at risk. Starting there is really the critical aspect from a security standpoint, because then you can make business decisions of, maybe it is sensitive, but you want to use it for an internal process. How do we put that data in the right place, like Eric referred to? So really starting with that, understand, what that risk is, and then build out these plans and processes from there.
Awesome. We did get one more question that came in, so I'm going to sneak this in our last few minutes here. How do you give it access to your data, and does it store your data for analysis?
This is for Copilot. So
For Copilot specifically, yeah.
So for the productivity tools in Copilot, it's leveraging the native graph permissions. So for instance, if Bruce shared a file with Eric, and Eric uses Copilot, it will automatically leverage those permissions if it thinks the file that he shared. So that's really what the user has access to, and how the Microsoft permissions are connected. And to be honest, they're very complex in the back end. So that's where just understanding, hey, is there Salesforce data that this is connected to? Is it, Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive? Where does this data exist? Because that's what Copilot's leveraging for its productivity suite, is for you to say, hey, build me a PowerPoint on Project X. It'll go look at all the files you have, reference Project X, and help you build that PowerPoint.
And it's my understanding that the way that Microsoft uses GPT, like they too use OpenAI as an API within the organization, but they're not accessing it from a public Gen AI, right? There's something there. There's some pun there. I haven't figured out yet. It's not the public side of it. It's just the API, and then they block it per tenant as well. Is that accurate from what you all know about it as well?
Well, I would say Microsoft has access to OpenAI's code and the weights for these models. They are running their own separate models. So they are leveraging OpenAI's intellectual property, but none of the data is flowing back to OpenAI. So that's a pretty common conversation we have. And that's why, at least on the private side, a lot of people, or custom side, a lot of people are leveraging Azure OpenAI, the APIs that Microsoft makes available, because those are within Microsoft's purview, and it kind of it's under Microsoft's data usage, policies, versus OpenAI does have an enterprise service. They also have the public service, and they have different data use rights. So.
Perfect. I could talk about this all day. You three are a wealth of knowledge, and I so appreciate you being here. I want to be respectful of time, and thank you all for joining. We will get you over this recording so that you can reference it and share it with your loved ones. But I appreciate you being here, and look out for more iterations of this. I think the conversation is just beginning, so we'll continue to bring in some additional brain power to keep this going. So thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.